Victory in psychological battles rarely belongs to the person who speaks the loudest. It rarely belongs to the person who exposes every lie, argues every point, or desperately tries to make a manipulator admit what they are doing. In reality, some of the most effective manipulators in the world survive because they expect confrontation. They prepare for it. They know how to twist conversations, shift blame, create confusion, and turn emotional reactions into opportunities. That is why so many people walk away from these encounters, feeling frustrated, exhausted, and powerless. They thought they were defending themselves, but without realizing it, they were playing a game designed by someone else. The uncomfortable truth is that manipulation is often less about intelligence and more about strategy. Many highly capable people become targets, not because they are weak, but because they are predictable. They react exactly when the manipulator expects them to react. They explain themselves when silence would be more powerful. They reveal their intentions when patience would give them the advantage. What makes this even more dangerous is that some of the strongest forms of manipulation are almost invisible. They do not arrive with threats or obvious aggression. They arrive through guilt, pressure, emotional triggers, subtle control, and carefully crafted situations that slowly push people in a direction they never intended to go. The most successful manipulators understand human behavior better than most people understand themselves. They study reactions, they notice patterns, they learn what creates fear, what creates guilt, and what creates compliance. Yet there is one thing they struggle to handle. They struggle with people who refuse to play by their rules, people who stay calm when provoked, people who think before reacting, people who quietly take control of the situation without announcing what they are doing. In this video, you will learn 7 powerful psychological rules that can completely change the way you deal with manipulators. You will discover why exposing a manipulator is often a mistake, why emotional reactions secretly give away your power, how strategic silence can shift the pressure back onto the other person, why unpredictability makes manipulation far more difficult, how information can be used as a weapon against you, why strong boundaries require action instead of speeches, and the final rule that often destroys a manipulator's influence more effectively than any argument ever could. Each of these lessons builds on the one before it, revealing a deeper understanding of how manipulation really works and how truly powerful people protect themselves from it. By the end of this video, you may start seeing certain conversations, relationships, and behaviors in a completely different way. Some of the insights near the end are often overlooked, yet they may be the most important of all. So stay with us until the very end, because the final rule brings everything together and shows why the strongest response is often the one nobody sees coming. Welcome to the channel. If you enjoy learning about psychology, human behavior, emotional intelligence, manipulation, and the hidden forces that shape everyday interactions, make sure to subscribe and join our growing community. Now let's begin. The first rule is surprisingly simple, yet most people break it the moment they realize they are being manipulated. They reveal that they understand the game. The moment they notice guilt tripping, gaslighting, emotional pressure, or subtle control, they rush to expose it. They point fingers. They call it out. They announce that they have figured everything out. On the surface, this feels like strength. It feels like taking control. But in many cases, it does the exact opposite. The reason is simple. A manipulator gains valuable information the moment they discover what you know. The second they realize you can see through one tactic, they immediately move to another. They change their approach. They adjust their story. They become more careful. They become harder to read. Many people believe that exposing manipulation automatically defeats it. In reality, exposing it often warns the manipulator that their current strategy is no longer working. Now they have time to adapt. Now they know they need to become more sophisticated. Now they know exactly where your attention is focused. Think about a skilled chess player. A smart opponent does not announce every move they are planning. They observe, they gather information, they stay patient. Manipulation works in a similar way. The person who understands the situation but stays calm often has a greater advantage than the person who immediately reveals everything they know. Observation is power. Accusation often feels powerful, but observation gives you information. Information creates options. Options create leverage. This becomes especially important because manipulators often depend on reactions to measure their success. Every reaction tells them something. Every emotional response reveals useful data. They are constantly studying people. Even when it appears they are simply having a conversation, they notice what creates guilt. They notice what creates fear. They notice what creates self-doubt. They notice which topics trigger defensiveness. Most people do not realize they are being studied in this way. They believe they are simply responding naturally. Meanwhile, the manipulator is quietly collecting information. Consider a person who constantly uses guilt to control others. They may remind you of favors they have done. They may act disappointed whenever you set a boundary. They may create situations where you feel responsible for their emotions. Eventually, you recognize the pattern. At this moment, many people make a predictable mistake. They say, "I know what you're doing." They start arguing about manipulation itself. Suddenly, the entire conversation shifts away from behavior and toward proving who is right. The manipulator now has a new opportunity. Instead of defending their behavior, they can defend their intentions. Instead of addressing the problem, they can create confusion. A different approach is often more effective. You recognize the guilt tripping, but you do not announce your discovery. You simply stop responding to it. The guilt no longer changes your decisions. The emotional pressure no longer works. You quietly remove the reward. This creates a powerful shift. The manipulator expected a reaction. They expected an argument. They expected an explanation. Instead, they receive nothing useful. Over time, many manipulation tactics weaken when they stop producing results. One of the least understood truths about manipulation is that awareness itself is not the weapon. Awareness is only the beginning. What matters is how you use that awareness. Some people become aware and then immediately surrender their advantage by revealing everything they know. Others become aware and start observing more carefully. They begin noticing patterns. They identify triggers. They recognize recurring strategies. They pay attention to timing. They learn which situations bring out manipulative behavior and which situations weaken it. This deeper understanding creates real power. Many manipulators rely on the assumption that other people will react emotionally and predictably. They assume they can push certain buttons and receive familiar responses. They assume people will become angry, defensive, guilty, fearful, or desperate to explain themselves. This assumption allows them to feel confident. It allows them to predict outcomes. The moment those predictions stop working, uncertainty begins to appear. And uncertainty is a problem for manipulators because control depends on certainty. Control depends on knowing what happens next. Control depends on understanding how another person is likely to behave. The more accurately they can predict you, the easier it becomes to influence you. The less accurately they can predict you, the harder manipulation becomes. This leads directly to the second rule. Once you stop revealing every thought, every realization, and every observation, another weakness begins to appear in the manipulator's strategy. That weakness is their dependence on emotional reactions. Many people assume manipulators are interested only in controlling outcomes. In reality, they are often collecting emotional information. Every emotional reaction provides clues. Anger reveals sensitive topics. Defensiveness reveals insecurities. Fear reveals pressure points. Excessive explanations reveal a desire for approval. All of these reactions become useful tools in the hands of someone who understands how to exploit them. This is why emotional control is so important. It is not about suppressing feelings. It is not about pretending emotions do not exist. It is about understanding that every visible reaction communicates information. When people become angry, they often reveal more than they intended. When people become defensive, they often expose vulnerabilities. When people become desperate to prove themselves, they frequently give away their position. Manipulators understand this instinctively. They know that emotional reactions can be more informative than facts. Facts tell them what happened. Emotions tell them what matters. And what matters can often be used for influence. Consider a situation where someone intentionally provokes you. They make an unfair accusation. They twist your words. They imply something negative about your character. Their goal may not be to win the argument. Their goal may be to trigger a reaction. Once the reaction appears, they have information. They know where the emotional pressure points exist. They know which topics create discomfort. They know how to guide future conversations. Most people walk directly into this trap because they focus only on defending themselves. They want to correct the misunderstanding. They want to prove the accusation is false. They want justice. But while they are busy defending themselves, they are also providing valuable emotional data. Now consider a different response. The accusation appears. The provocation arrives. Instead of reacting immediately, you remain calm. You do not rush to defend yourself. You do not become angry. You do not enter a lengthy explanation. The manipulator receives almost no useful information. Suddenly, their strategy becomes less effective because the expected reaction never arrives. This often creates frustration on their side. Manipulation depends on feedback. It depends on seeing what works. It depends on testing different approaches and measuring results. When reactions disappear, that feedback becomes difficult to obtain. The manipulator loses clarity. They lose direction. They lose confidence in their ability to control the situation. Many people misunderstand calmness. They think calmness is weakness. They think silence means surrender. They think emotional restraint means passivity. In reality, calmness can be one of the strongest forms of resistance. It protects information. It prevents emotional exposure. It interrupts the cycle that manipulation depends upon. The more emotional energy you provide, the more material a manipulator can work with. The less emotional energy you provide, the fewer tools they possess. This does not mean becoming cold or disconnected. It means becoming intentional. It means deciding when a response is necessary, and when it simply feeds a game you no longer wish to play. As emotional reactions become less available, another powerful tool starts to emerge. This tool is often uncomfortable at first because it goes against natural instincts. Most people feel pressure to respond immediately. They feel pressure to defend themselves instantly. They feel pressure to fill every silence. Yet silence has a unique psychological effect. Silence creates uncertainty. People expect responses. Conversations follow patterns. Questions receive answers. Accusations receive defenses. Criticism receives explanations. Manipulators rely heavily on these patterns because predictable patterns make control easier. The moment those patterns are interrupted, the dynamic begins to change. A loaded accusation enters the conversation. Normally, a person might respond instantly. They might explain, they might argue, they might defend themselves. But now something different happens. There is no immediate response. There is a pause. There is silence. That silence creates a gap. Inside that gap, uncertainty begins to grow. The manipulator expected a script. They expected familiar lines. They expected predictable behavior. Instead, the script suddenly disappears. Now they must think. Now they must wonder. Now they must operate without the certainty they usually enjoy. Silence can be surprisingly powerful because people often reveal more when they become uncomfortable. The person who expected control may start talking more. They may start explaining themselves. They may start filling the space. The pressure quietly shifts. This does not mean silence should be used as a trick. It means silence should be respected as a tool. Not every statement deserves an immediate response. Not every accusation deserves an instant defense. Not every challenge requires participation. Strategic silence creates room for observation. It creates room for thinking. It creates room for emotional control. Most importantly, it interrupts automatic reactions. Automatic reactions are easy to manipulate. Intentional responses are much harder. As people become more comfortable with silence, they often notice another interesting change. They become less predictable. And this matters because manipulation thrives on predictability. Manipulators study patterns. They pay attention to habits. They notice routines in behavior. They learn what creates guilt, what creates compliance, and what creates hesitation. The more predictable a person becomes, the easier they are to influence. Predictability functions like a map. The manipulator knows where certain roads lead. They know which buttons produce which outcomes. They know how conversations are likely to unfold. This knowledge allows them to operate with confidence. Then the map stops working. The person who always explains themselves suddenly stops explaining. The person who always argues suddenly remains calm. The person who always seeks approval suddenly becomes comfortable with disagreement. A simple phrase can completely alter the dynamic. That's your opinion. Nothing more. No lengthy defense. No attempt to change minds. No emotional struggle. The conversation reaches a dead end because the expected route no longer exists. This is what makes unpredictability so powerful. It removes certainty. It forces the manipulator to operate without a reliable map. The strategies that worked yesterday may fail today. The responses they expected never arrive. Their confidence begins to weaken because prediction becomes difficult. People often assume power comes from dominating conversations. Yet some of the strongest forms of power come from controlling access to information. When reactions become measured, when silence becomes comfortable, and when behavior becomes less predictable, an important realization begins to emerge. Not all information should be freely available. And understanding that truth changes everything. By this point, a manipulator has already lost several important advantages. They no longer know exactly what you understand. They are receiving fewer emotional reactions. They cannot easily predict your behavior. They are facing more silence and less cooperation. Yet there is still one powerful resource they may be using against you, and many people hand it over without hesitation. That resource is information. Information is one of the most valuable forms of leverage in any relationship, conversation, or conflict. The more someone knows about your goals, fears, insecurities, plans, frustrations, and ambitions, the more opportunities they have to influence your decisions. This is why experienced manipulators are often excellent information gatherers. They ask questions that seem harmless. They encourage oversharing. They create a sense of trust very quickly. They position themselves as supportive listeners. Sometimes they even make people feel uniquely understood. The goal is not always friendship. The goal is often access. Many people assume manipulation begins with control. In reality, manipulation often begins with observation. Before someone can influence you effectively, they need to understand you. They need to know what motivates you. They need to know what worries you. They need to know what you want badly enough to compromise your judgment. Every piece of information helps them build a clearer picture. Think about how often people reveal important details without realizing it. They share future plans before those plans become reality. They talk about personal weaknesses. They discuss insecurities. They explain every goal. They reveal every frustration. None of this seems dangerous at first. In healthy relationships, openness can create trust. But in unhealthy relationships, openness can create vulnerability. A manipulator listens differently. While most people listen to connect, manipulators often listen to collect. They are paying attention to details that can become useful later. They notice what causes excitement. They notice what causes anxiety. They notice who you want approval from. They notice what success means to you. They notice where your confidence is strongest and where it is weakest. This is why strategic people are careful about what they reveal and when they reveal it. They understand that information is not simply information. Information is influence. Information can be used to support you, but it can also be used to control you. Consider someone who constantly shares future goals with the wrong person. They talk about a new opportunity. They discuss a business idea. They reveal a career move. They announce plans long before action begins. At first, the other person seems supportive. Then obstacles start appearing. Doubts are introduced. Discouragement becomes more common. Small comments begin planting uncertainty. What looked like support slowly transforms into resistance. The manipulator understands something important. People are often easier to they start than after they succeed. By targeting confidence early, they can influence decisions before momentum develops. This is why many successful people become surprisingly private. Not because they are secretive. Not because they are antisocial. They simply understand the value of timing. They know that unfinished plans are fragile. They know that not everyone deserves access to every detail. They know that some conversations create clarity while others create confusion. Manipulators often depend on access. Access to your thoughts, access to your emotions, access to your plans, access to your weaknesses. Every piece of unnecessary information becomes another possible tool. Notice how often manipulative people ask questions that seem innocent. They may ask about your relationships, your finances, your ambitions, your fears, your disagreements with others. Sometimes the questions seem caring. Sometimes they seem casual. Yet over time, a detailed picture begins to emerge. The less unnecessary information they have, the fewer tools they possess. This principle sounds simple, but it changes everything. It changes how you communicate. It changes who receives access to personal details. It changes how quickly trust is given. It changes how much influence another person can gain over your decisions. People often believe power comes from having information, but power also comes from controlling information. Knowing when to speak, knowing when to remain private, knowing who has earned access and who has not. The strongest protection is not deception. It is discretion. A manipulator cannot weaponize information they never receive. A manipulator cannot attack plans they never hear about. A manipulator cannot exploit weaknesses they never discover. As this understanding grows, another realization begins to emerge. Removing information limits a manipulator's tools, but tools alone are not enough. Tools require access. A person may understand your weaknesses. They may know your goals. They may recognize your emotional patterns. Yet none of that matters if access begins to disappear. And this brings us to one of the most misunderstood concepts in human behavior. Boundaries. Most people think boundaries are words. They think boundaries are speeches. They think boundaries are warnings. They think boundaries are long conversations explaining what will and will not be tolerated. Manipulators often love these conversations, not because they respect boundaries, because they learn where the lines are and then test them. A common mistake occurs when people confuse announcements with enforcement. They repeatedly explain what behavior they dislike. They repeatedly ask for respect. They repeatedly warn someone about consequences that never arrive. The manipulator notices this immediately. Every unfulfilled warning teaches a lesson. Every ignored consequence sends a message. Every boundary without action becomes weaker. This is why strong boundaries are not built through speeches. They are built through behavior. A manipulator may hear the same complaint 20 times without changing anything. Yet one meaningful consequence can suddenly alter the situation. The reason is simple. Words create possibilities. Actions create reality. Consider a person who constantly disrespects your time. They call at inappropriate hours. They demand immediate attention. They ignore schedules. Most people respond by explaining the problem repeatedly. They ask for consideration. They ask for change. They hope understanding will solve the issue. The manipulator hears the complaint but continues the behavior because nothing meaningful changes. Now imagine a different approach. The behavior occurs. Access is reduced, availability changes, responses become limited, no dramatic speech, no emotional confrontation, no lengthy debate, just a consequence. Suddenly the dynamic shifts. For the first time, behavior produces a result that cannot be ignored. Manipulators often test boundaries because testing reveals weakness. They push a little further, then a little further again. They watch carefully to see what happens. If nothing happens, they continue. If consequences remain absent, they learn they can go even further. This process rarely happens all at once. It happens gradually. One small violation, one small excuse, one small compromise, then another and another, until the original boundary barely exists. Strong boundaries interrupt this process, not through anger, not through threats, not through endless explanations, through consistency. Consistency is what gives boundaries their strength. A single consequence followed by 10 exceptions teaches confusion. A consistent consequence teaches certainty. Manipulators understand certainty. They understand patterns. They understand what behavior leads to what outcome. When consequences become predictable, many forms of manipulation lose effectiveness. People sometimes avoid boundaries because they fear appearing rude. They fear conflict. They fear disappointing others. They fear being misunderstood. Manipulators often benefit from these fears. The more uncomfortable you become with enforcement, the more freedom they gain. This is why boundaries are ultimately an act of self-respect. They are not designed to control others. They are designed to define your participation. You are not controlling another person's behavior. You are controlling your response to that behavior. That distinction changes everything. Instead of demanding change, you adjust access. Instead of forcing compliance, you create consequences. Instead of arguing endlessly, you allow actions to communicate. Over time, this creates a powerful shift in perspective. You stop focusing on convincing people. You start focusing on protecting your peace. You stop obsessing over their choices. You become responsible for your own. Many manipulators find this deeply frustrating because boundaries reduce opportunities. They reduce influence. They reduce control. Most importantly, they reduce access. And once access begins disappearing, another transformation becomes possible. A transformation that many people never fully reach because they become trapped in a desire for revenge. This desire is understandable. Being manipulated creates anger. Being controlled creates resentment. Being deceived creates a natural urge to fight back. Many people spend years imagining the perfect comeback, the perfect exposure, the perfect moment of justice. They want the manipulator to admit everything. They want validation. They want recognition. They want the other person to finally understand the damage they caused. The problem is that revenge often creates an invisible chain. It keeps emotional attachment alive. The manipulator remains at the center of attention. The manipulator remains the focus. The manipulator continues occupying mental space, even after the conflict ends. This is why the final rule is so powerful. Winning is not proving them wrong. Winning is becoming unreachable. Many people confuse victory with domination. They think victory means defeating the manipulator publicly. They think victory means exposing every lie. They think victory means forcing accountability. Sometimes those outcomes happen. Often they do not. And when they do not, people remain emotionally trapped. True, freedom begins when the need to win disappears. This does not mean accepting bad behavior. It does not mean excusing manipulation. It means refusing to build your future around someone else's actions. Success becomes more important than revenge. Growth becomes more important than arguments. Peace becomes more important than validation. Manipulators often expect another battle. They expect another conversation. Another explanation, another emotional reaction, another attempt to prove a point. Then something unexpected happens. You move forward. No dramatic exit, no final speech. No endless debate, no audience, no performance, just distance, just progress, just detachment. This is incredibly difficult for manipulators to handle because their influence depends on relevance. Their control depends on participation. Their power depends on access. When attention disappears, influence weakens. When participation disappears, control weakens. When emotional investment disappears, manipulation weakens. Many people spend years trying to defeat manipulators. The strongest people often do something different. They stop making the manipulator the center of the story. They become the center of their own story instead. Every hour spent building a better future becomes an hour no longer spent fighting old battles. Every new goal reduces the importance of old conflicts. Every step forward increases distance from the environment where manipulation once thrived. This is what makes detachment so powerful. It is not passive. It is not weak. It is not surrender. It is a decision to stop feeding energy into a game that no longer deserves your attention. The manipulator expects resistance. What they fear most is irrelevance. Because once they become irrelevant, they lose the one thing they wanted from the beginning, your focus. The hidden truth behind every manipulator is that their power is never as independent as it appears. It depends on access. It depends on attention. It depends on emotional reactions. And most of all, it depends on participation. The moment you understand this, the entire game begins to look different. You stop seeing manipulation as a battle that must be won through arguments, explanations, or confrontation. You start seeing it for what it really is, a system that survives only when someone keeps feeding it. The greatest mistake many people make is believing they need one final conversation, one perfect comeback, or one decisive victory to finally feel free. But freedom rarely arrives through winning an argument. It arrives through reaching a point where the argument no longer matters. The people who truly outgrow manipulators are not always the strongest, loudest, or most aggressive. They are often the calmest. They learn when to stay silent. They learn what information to protect. They learn how to control their reactions. They learn how to enforce boundaries without seeking approval. And eventually, they learn the most important lesson of all. Their energy is too valuable to spend on people committed to controlling it. Years from now, you will not remember every argument you won. You will not remember every accusation you answered. You will not remember every attempt to prove your point. But you will remember the moment you stopped giving your power away. You will remember the moment you realized that peace is worth more than revenge, clarity is worth more than validation, and growth is worth more than endless conflict. So if there is